Hey everybody, welcome to Highly Unlikely with Josh and Jenaye, but unfortunately there's no Jenaye today. She's at home with the kids, but we have, we're pre-recording
a much
this.
lesser version.
Yes, it's not going to be as good and conversational, but today is actually the arena. So if you're listening to this podcast episode, this was pre-recorded, but because of that, Granger Smith is here, and he's going to share a little bit of his story. I'm going to ask him some questions, but before we get into it, because I always forget to draw the question from the bowl when Jenaye's not here. So I'm going to do that first so that we can start off that way. And the question is, here we go. What hobby do you wish you had more time for?
All of them. Snow skiing.
Snow skiing?
Yeah.
Are you a good skier?
I don't know how we would define good.
Yeah.
I love snow skiing. I have done it since I was probably 4 years old. My family would drive. I'm from Texas, and we would do what Texans do and go to New Mexico and drive over there and spend the night in Amarillo with some friends and family, and then we would go to snow ski somewhere. And so I just love it. I'm actually not a guy that puts in headphones and listens to music. I just love so much of snow skiing, even just the sounds of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a meditation for me.
That's so cool. Where's the coolest place that you've gotten to ski?
Skiing always depends on the weather.
Yeah.
Where you are at the moment. So regardless of location, some locations like Lake Tahoe is just so beautiful. The trees are so big there in the blue lake. But if you're there with bad weather, it's not a good experience.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about Montana, and Whitefish is pretty great. They have such consistent snow.
Yeah. It's a great place. If Jenaye were here, she would divulge a story about us going skiing when we were on a vacation in Banff. And we got all our ski gear. I never skied. She grew up skiing. So I was looking for the bunny hill to try to learn how to ski. And did we tell the story on the podcast already? I don't even want to tell it, but we got all our gear. We looked like skiers. We were ready to go, and we asked one of the guys, "Hey, where's the bunny hill?" Because Josh has to practice before he goes. And the guy points to the ski lift. And so we just thought you get on the ski lift and they like take you to a smaller hill that you can go down. So we get on the ski lift and it's just going up and up and up and up and up and up. And I'm like, I've literally never had skis on my feet before. And we get literally to the top of the mountain and I'm watching people get off the ski lift and they're just hopping off and like skiing off onto the top of the mountain to go down. And I was like, I can't even get off the ski lift, but you can't ride it back down. So I'm going to have to fall off this thing. So we get to the top of the mountain, I fall off, and then I literally went down the mountain and I'd go one direction and fall, and then the other direction and fall. And Jenaye got to the bottom first and she just recorded the whole thing. And it was awful and embarrassing. And I made one run down the mountain and I was done for the whole day. So that's
you're a good sport, man.
That's my one, really, really terrible.
You didn't break your femur though.
No. I know somebody who did that, but and my knees are intact, so I'm grateful. But maybe someday in the future. So, Granger, I was introduced to you because I was out at Levi Lesko's church and he shared a little bit about what you guys just had in common, and also how you met. And then you spoke that Sunday. And I remember just sitting back and listening to your message and just I had a huge appreciation for your story. But then getting to hear you share about your faith and about your encounter with Jesus and serving him. I just connected with it, and I felt like your personality and your style and how you presented Christ was so sincere and authentic and even kind of unique to sometimes what people hear. And so I would just love to back the train way up, because a lot of people know you from Granger Smith and Earl Dibbles Jr. That's part of your world that I was never familiar with, but obviously a huge part of who you are. And so can you just say hi to everybody? Tell them about your family, where you guys are living now, and then can you bring us from country music to where you are today and tell us some of the story?
Sure. Yeah, I'm married to Amber, and we live in Georgetown, Texas-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a suburb of Austin, and then we're a suburb of that. So we live out in the country. We have 4 kids. London, who's 12. Lincoln's 10. River, we lost when he was 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then our caboose, Maverick, who's wild and about 2.5 right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually I will introduce myself these days, at least the past 8 months, as former country music singer, because for about 30 years, that's all I've ever known.
Yeah.
To make a living or traveling, and just what I've always done.
Yeah. So I know that was a huge part of your life. And then you wrote a book.
Yes.
Called Like a River.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. I listened to it in my car, and just appreciated the honesty and the detail, and that you just lay out your journey of coming to know Jesus. And so tell us about as much as you want to share. I know your story is available other places. I know people can read the book, but tell us from the transformation from country music into saying like, hey, I think I'm going to pursue ministry.
Yeah. I have always called myself a Christian. That I've never in my life, I can't think of a time where I didn't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Spent a lot of time in church as a kid, and camps and youth groups, and over a couple decades of touring in the music business, you wouldn't have known that about me.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I would have defended and told you if you asked, but you wouldn't have looked at me and said, "Oh, that guy loves Jesus," as an outward reflection and response, overflow of a changed heart. You wouldn't have just said that. And the Lord has and does and continues to use life-altering events to kind of shake the tree of the blind eyes of his people, to open the blind eyes of his people.
Mm.
And that's what happened to me on June 4th, 2019. And that's when I lost my son, River. And I was in the backyard with all 3 kids. And I was playing gymnastics with my daughter, and the 2 boys were playing water gun fight. And I remember at one point thinking it was quiet and looking over and seeing River face down in our pool. And he was inside the gated, the fenced pool. And so I couldn't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And I crashed into the water and picked him up and thought that he would be, because I had just seen him, I thought that he would be coughing and scared and crying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what happened. Instead, he was lifeless and cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I took him to the side of the pool and started CPR, even though I didn't really know what to do. And the emergency services, it took them about 10 minutes to arrive because we lived out in the country. And they were able to revive his heartbeat. But once we got to the hospital the next day, the doctors came in and told us that there was no chance of survival.
Mm-hmm.
Those 10, 12 minutes were just too long for his little brain to go without oxygen. So I was stuck. My life was wrecked. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
If there was even an option of moving forward, I didn't know. And as a cultural Christian, the whole idea, and I use that term cultural Christian,
mm-hmm.
you could also say nominal Christian, or in my book, I think I said dog tag Christian.
Yeah.
Because in World War II, when they gave dog tags out, they asked what religion you were, so that if they found you dead, they would know what kind of priest to bring to your funeral.
Right.
It was like Christian.
Right. Yeah. So as opposed to, what would you say, convictional Christian? Or
yeah, I mean, you could just say as opposed to a biblical sense of a converted Christian, which means a follower of Christ, a disciple of Christ.
Yeah.
Someone that has the Holy Spirit dwelling in them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means to be a Christian. And as Protestants, we know that we're saved by grace through faith, and this is not our own doing. It is a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no man may boast. But we also know that a saving faith would manifest itself in the form of obedience.
Yeah. So grace is also grace, or without works is dead. Faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
In the same tension.
Yeah. Yeah. So when James says that, and sometimes it's misunderstood as we earn our way to heaven, and we don't. But if you have a faith that's not showing any kind of result of a changed life, then you would question if that's even a real faith at all.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was in 2019. Said that I was a Christian, just like I would say I was a deer hunter, but if I didn't spend any time in the woods, then you wouldn't believe me. It wouldn't be real. I would just say it. And that's not a danger that I think is prevalent in the rest of the world. It's really uniquely American because of the way we've grown up. A lot of people that I've talked to in other parts of the world don't understand, why would you say you follow Jesus and even waste your time on Sunday going to church if the rest of the week you don't care about it? That's very strange. And yet in America we go, no, family, God, country, it's kind of all united.
Yep.
And it's because it's our culture.
It is very cultural.
And I knew that, not at the time, but I do now looking back because of the way I reacted to June 4th, 2019. And the way I reacted to it when I threw my hands up and said, what do I do? It wasn't a, God, you're sovereign. Give me your spirit, give me direction, give me peace. Reveal yourself to me in the Bible so that I could know by your character who you are and rest in that. It wasn't any of that. It was, okay, I got to fix myself.
Yeah.
With therapy, with self-help, with got to eat right, got to get up early, got to read my nonfiction books, got to meditate for 10 minutes and empty my mind, focus on my breath, do all these things to mitigate the damage that was in me. And in that mitigation was also, and read a Christian devotional. It was just part of the larger equation of trying to fix myself.
Yeah.
But I had some major problems in that. One, I was suffering with extreme PTSD.
Yeah.
Visions of the tragic events and different sequences, whether that was seeing River in the pool, whether that was seeing his face dead, whether that was seeing that doctor walk in telling me there's no chance, or whether that was back at visions of the funeral. River, his favorite tractor was an excavator. And there was just a horrible irony as I left his funeral and looked back one more time at the gravesite as we were driving away, a family with one less child, and a little excavator was dropping dirt onto his coffin. And those ideas were forming a PTSD that was just kind of crippling me. And the second part of that, and partly tied to the PTSD, was I was just overcome by guilt and shame of being an insufficient father, failed father. And part of that problem was the world's answer to that was always the same. The world's answer was, you're not a failed father. You shouldn't feel guilty. It is not your fault. You're a good dad, which I couldn't reconcile just practically because I was the responsible adult in the backyard that evening. So who else's fault could it have been? And if I'm not an insufficient father, then what would qualify? Because that seems pretty bad.
Yeah.
And these things were crippling for me. These like mental gymnastics were crippling for me. And I related more honestly to like war veterans that struggled with the same kind of wrestling with guilt and shame and insufficiency as a human.
I know I'm jumping a little bit forward in your story, but
I know I'm going to stop so that you could have a chance because I don't want to just keep going.
We were kind of just talking about this at breakfast, about having a high view of God, and I know what you kind of came around to, and now how you would talk about it. If you were talking to another family that was walking through it, and sometimes we try to help in those moments. I think when people are walking through stuff like that by offering truth, but it can come across feeling like an empty platitude of like, God's ways are higher than ours, or he works all things together for our good, which is scripture and it's true, but it almost, we don't offer enough of a framework of how God works for people to really be able to grab onto. So I think kind of where I'm going, but can you talk about like how you had to wrestle through God's role even in River's passing?
Yeah, so a couple things. Early on, and remember, I'm so far that I'm still speaking from my cultural Christianity position. Even though the Spirit was doing His work in me, I see the kind of the echoes of that early on. I remember when we were praying in the hospital for River, and there was like a little team around us. Everyone was praying in a circle in the hospital, and everyone was praying for healing. God, do a miracle. God, revive this baby. God, heal this baby. Do this. You're a miracle worker. You could do this. And that is correct. And that's right. And we should always pray for healing because God is a healer. But just because He is a healer also does not mean that He always heals. And early on, and even in the hospital, I realized that's not the whole prayer. It's not the complete prayer, because the prayer also has to be, Lord, but your will be done. And if it's not your will to heal this baby, if it's not your plan to heal this child, then Lord, show me what to do next. Show me, fill me with courage and wisdom and understanding of how to lead this family tomorrow if you don't heal him. And so we hold both of those things together. Lord, please heal. You know my heart. Please revive this baby with a miracle. But it's ultimately your will and not mine. And if you don't, let me understand why you didn't. It's crazy because Elijah in the Bible was a healer, like revived people and healed and did all these miracles. And then there's this little line in the Bible that says, when Elijah came down with the illness that would be the end of his life, and you go, wait a minute, he got an illness that killed him. The healer, Elijah the prophet, died because he got an illness. Sometimes illness is for healing, and sometimes it's for homecoming. And in the case of River, that tragedy was for his homecoming. And these are, I'm just kind of walking through all these realizations I had to do late at night as I'm thinking about who God is, what the Bible, who God is as revealed in the Bible. And another thing I learned, and it's obvious in the Bible, is that God knows all the days we have. And we see in the Psalms that our days are numbered before we were even formed in our mother's womb. All the days are numbered, meaning River had 1,114 days. That was the number. Before he was even formed in his mother's womb, God planned for River 1,114 days. And so for me to think that there should have been 1115 or 1120 or 9,000, and that it was an accident, that it was less than that, is not biblical, and that's just not who God is. That doesn't make it easier to wrestle with. But sometimes when we stand on truth in our own insecurity, we could finally stand firm and knowing that I don't get it, but God does.
So I know in the days following that, you guys moved houses, you did some retreats and some counseling, to try to get better. But you were really moving from cultural Christian into, you even went back to touring, right? At one point.
Yeah, I did.
But there was this process that was kind of happening in you over a period of time. And so what was kind of the next phase of that journey of in your wrestling with the Lord? And coming to know Jesus in a different way?
So the Lord crushed me even more. After the loss of my son, I'm pretty stubborn. And that noose just continued to tighten as the Lord crushed me more.
You're messing with people right now, because a lot of people in American Christianity don't like the idea of suffering, Like it's kind of it is not really a part of our theology in some circles, like the Lord would crush me or the Lord would allow me to walk through suffering. It can very easily become like, oh, I follow Jesus and he's going to protect me from everything and I'm going to grow. But like I just appreciate that you're saying this, because there's some things that are purchased through suffering that you can't get any other way.
Yeah, that could be its whole an entire episode just on that.
Right.
And so to that person, to that hypothetical person, I would say a couple of things. One, that doesn't relate to anything that as we experience the world around us, we would never say, I love Jesus because he protects me and he keeps me from everything. Mm-hmm. Just look around you. This world is full of suffering. Mm-hmm. Since the fall, we're living in a world that wasn't supposed to be this way. And we see horrible things. And to say that if you love Jesus, he protects you from those horrible things, we just know is wrong because we don't experience the world that way.
Right.
And then on the other hand, I would say also, what would it be like to live in a world where everything was just perfect on this earth? And is that a way that you would want to raise your kids, protecting them from every kind of thing? Or do you want to prepare them and walk through the tough things with them so that they become fortified and stronger, like a blacksmith that works with a piece of metal that's corrupted and been out of shape, and yet through the heat, he forms that iron to make the piece of metal that's pristine and without blemish.
Yeah,
that's how we experience the world. And so, on top of all that, the Bible just says that he crushes his people, but for their good. Mm-hmm. It's not because he's just a bad God or he just enjoys suffering. Everything else, and you're right that people question that, but everything else in the world doesn't operate that way. When you read a book, you love the book because of the struggle in it and then the redemption. Your favorite movie, every favorite movie we have has the struggle, the bad guy, and the redemption. Yep. And you love it because of that. You take away the bad guy, it's a boring movie. It's a boring book. A football team that wins the Super Bowl, the guy holds up the trophy in the end and cries with joy to hold up the trophy, not because they had a perfect season, but because of the imperfect season, and because of the close losses and the injuries and the disunity in the locker room and the hard work through years, and he finally holds the trophy because of the suffering. So that's how God operates also with us. And so the Lord continued to crush me, back to that. Mm-hmm. And I was getting a little bit worse with every bit of self-help that I was trying to fix myself with. Until one night in Boise, Idaho, it all culminated one night. I call it the dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
But
is that the chapter in the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, the details of that night are not as necessary as just knowing that I didn't want to live anymore. Mm-hmm. And I came to the conclusion that things would just be better if I just wasn't around. I was overrun by guilt, overrun by shame, overrun by grief, overrun by the what I thought was and still think is a real feeling of being an insufficient father. And I just decided I didn't want to live anymore. And through this horrible night, something happened to me. And as you can tell, just like you, Josh, I'm a thinker. Mm-hmm. And through this thinking, I realized by God's grace that night that I was not alone on that bus, that there was a spiritual enemy that had been with me for who knows how long. It was a spiritual warfare. Mm-hmm. And it was that night I cried out to Jesus to save me. Mm-hmm. As I say the story, how authentic was I in that plea to Jesus? I don't know. It was maybe just a knee-jerk reaction from my praying mother. But regardless of my sincerity in it, the enemy stopped. And I had peace, just enough peace to fall to the floor and reset And when I woke up the next morning, embarrassed from what had happened, embarrassed from how stupid I had been, how careless I had been, I started a new mission that next morning. Who was Jesus really? Because if this spiritual enemy had come so close to killing me, and yet the advocate had diminished that enemy, who was this advocate? Who was this way to God? And so that was another turning point. Still not yet what I'm considering the Christian that we kind of defined earlier.
Yeah.
I was now a searcher, but a diligent, passionate searcher for who is Jesus.
Well, one thing I love about even how you talk about this, because I read that moment in the book, I was pulling into a Lowe's parking lot when that moment played, and I just put my head down. I had goosebumps, and I started sobbing because, I was like, that is the moment where, but how you tell this story and even your journey with Jesus, it wasn't like a light switch just came on at one moment and everything got better, everything changed. It was like you were in this process of leaving cultural Christianity and discovering who Jesus really was and then devoting your life to him, which has kind of led you to where you are today. And so just thinking about people listening, like sometimes we just want that moment of like, I gave Jesus everything and now everything's going to change and get better, you know? And it's for so many people who tell their story like that, that's a process.
Yeah. You know? And when you say that, which is correct, but then it always leads my mind to go, what does that practically look like? I want to give Jesus everything.
Yeah.
What is everything? And what does that even mean practically? So that was kind of the journey I was on.
Yeah.
And what does that mean practically? How do I understand this? And I look back now because I was keeping a journal. So I know better what I was thinking, not because I have a great memory, but because I was keeping a digital journal. And I still look back every morning, even including this morning, I could look back on the last 6 years since I started the journal and kind of see what I was thinking, what I was going through, where I was. So next year I'll go, oh, look, I was in Bismarck.
Yeah.
Hang with Josh on the podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's neat to be able to reflect on that. And then that helps me put breadcrumbs together and see where I was.
Wow. That's great advice. So you came out of that experience and I think you just started digging into the Bible.
Not yet.
Okay.
I started digging into the most logical place that any person searches, YouTube.
Okay. Right up there with scripture.
Yeah. I wasn't there yet. I didn't know. Yeah. I mean, scripture is where I ended up. But first I was like, well, I'll go to YouTube. Like the gospel, like I don't remember what I searched, but I think I thought I need a preacher to tell me what to do or to help explain this. Yeah. And the most popular preacher on YouTube was Billy Graham. Yeah. And so I started seeing all these really old Billy Graham videos and then really new ones and kind of seeing the continuity between the different versions of him. Yeah. But what that was also doing is just kicking up an algorithm of my search so that all different kinds of preachers were coming up on YouTube. And I was just kind of consuming it all. Yeah. Just
Come on, God doesn't need to just save your soul. He needs to save your algorithm. So
that'll be the thumbnail for this. God needs to save your algorithm. Yeah. And, so I was kind of looking for what to do next. Yeah. But also what was happening was the gospel was just pouring over me over and over. But it wasn't until March 1st, 2020 that became crystal clear to me. And it was to eventually get to the Bible. What got me to the Bible was I was listening to a sermon out of the book of John, chapter 14, and at verse 22, the disciple asked Jesus, Lord, why is it that you manifest yourself to us and not the rest of the world? Which is the difference between Christians and non-Christians. Why are there Christians and non-Christians? And I was like, oh, wow, that's a great question. So I was driving and I leaned into my steering wheel, like gripping my steering wheel, like, yeah, Lord, how do you answer that? Because here I am wondering, why did I deserve your presence on that tour bus? Why didn't I just take my life? Why did I deserve the enemy to be shunned away from me? Why? And Jesus answered him in a shocking way.
Mm-hmm.
He said, if anyone loves me, he'll keep my word.
Yeah.
And my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him.
Mm.
And it was like reverse psychology, really.
Yeah.
Jesus speaks in reverse psychology all the time. He's saying that you'll know those people that love me because those are the people that keep my word.
Mm.
And I loved him and felt loved, and yet I didn't keep his word.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I am in that category. And so I need to know his word. So in order to keep his word, I need to know it. In order to know it, I need to read it. And so it all practically made sense to me. And none of this was out of an obligation to earn his love. I felt overwhelmingly loved, redeemed, restored, forgiven. I felt in a way that the world messed up. And the way the world said, you're not guilty. Jesus says, you are. You, Granger, you are an insufficient father. You are guilty. Come to me. I make you clean. I restore you, not from anything that you are, but because of my divine right and what I did on the cross. I then make you a co-heir of the kingdom, adopted, restored, forgiven, insufficient father, made sufficient by my work. And it was like, I just felt new. I felt clean. I felt loved. And in response, I wanted to be the guy that kept the word. Like, Lord, let me be the guy that you're talking about.
Yeah.
If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
So I remember going home and just rearranged my whole routine, all the meditation and the devotionals and the self-help books. I just said, I want to read the Bible now. And by God's grace, Amber, my wife, was tracking with me because I told her, let's do this. And she said, okay. So I was like, okay, where do we start? And I thought, how about Matthew 1? That's the birth of Christ, beginning of the New Testament. That seems like a decent spot. So I started reading like my life depended on it.
Yeah.
And I believe it did. And as I read and made it through the Gospels and then started in Acts to see what happened after Jesus ascended to heaven, and then that got me into Romans and then 1 Corinthians, and just kept going. I wanted to know. And by the time I finished Revelation, I thought, now I got to start in Genesis because Jesus said that Moses and the prophets were talking about him. So I want to know more about him through the Old Testament. So I started in Genesis and worked my way forward. And then COVID hit. And my schedule cleared. And I'm sitting there in this little place that we bought in an RV. And because we left our house needing a change, and I'm sitting there just with nothing to do but read the Bible. And sometimes I wouldn't understand it. And I would go to this YouTube page called The Bible Project. These guys just explain in a practical way. And then I would ask more questions. And then I would wonder about something else. And I would look that up. And I just was working my way through it in that way. And I started understanding who he is and who God's character is and how he operates in that way and why we can be crushed, why that he would crush us, why that he would allow suffering in a world that seems like it should be perfect, but suffering enters the world and he seemingly allows it to enter. Not because he loves evil or loves sin or loves suffering, but he does it in a way to refine us, like heat refines the iron. You don't have to love the heat to love the iron more, knowing that the heat is going to be what makes the iron. And seeing that and then realizing an answer to something I wanted that I felt for a long time. And it was the danger that I would hear from people in the theology that you talked about earlier, the kind of the man-centered theology, that people would say things like, Granger, I want you to know God had nothing to do with the death of your son. And just practically, I would think, then where was he? And they would be like, what? So if he had nothing to do with the death of my son, then where was he that night? Did he forget? Did his alarm not go off? Did he miss it? Was he not strong enough to stop it? And they were like, They would never have an answer. And it was so scary to me to even think of God in terms of, so sorry, he had nothing to do with it, but he's going to try to help you now to get through it. Mm-hmm. I was like, that would be like saying a general has nothing to do with the battle of his soldiers, or a football coach has nothing to do with the game with his players. And suddenly I knew that God did have something to do with the death of my son. In fact, everything, because if he didn't, then it would be an accident, and it would be an absolute tragedy, and God would be this God that's just constantly like playing whack-a-mole and going, oh, I hope nothing else happens. I don't like this evil. Instead, as revealed in the Bible, God was saying, I was there. Mm-hmm. I was there at the pool. And yes, I hate evil and I hate death, but I've allowed it for reasons you can't possibly understand, Granger. Mm-hmm. So stand up, and I will walk you through it every step of the way. And you may not know on this side of heaven why certain things happened, but I work them for good with my purpose. That's who he was as revealed in the Bible. And that was earth-shattering to me. So much so that it began to, these ideas began to kind of get into country music. And I would get off the stage and people would be like, hey, I lost my grandpa and I don't know what to do, because I know God didn't want that to happen. I'd be like, we need to talk, because you're making God a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And so
is he all knowing, all powerful, all present, or is he not?
Is he not? Because if he's not, then he's not God. Mm-hmm. Because to be God means all knowing, all powerful, all good. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Selah. Something to think about.
Yeah.
So I think the next progression and the question that I want to ask you is that maybe people think, is God is doing all this stuff in your life. You have this massive following. And I think you probably had a wrestling in your soul too for a while. Why would you walk away from millions of followers, millions of people that you can influence to do ministry? Why not take the platform that you had and use it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I wrestled with for a few years. If you have a big platform that the Lord gives you and a loud microphone, then why squander that? Mm-hmm. And so that sounds amazing on paper. Like, hey, God, great plan. You and I are going to plunder hell together. Mm-hmm.
They're going to come to a country concert and we're going to give them worship music.
Yeah. They're going to come to a country concert as a cultural Christian and just be caught off guard and just think, wow, the gospel is going to slap me in the face, and then I'm going to be a Christian. And I couldn't help over the years feel that was a wrong idea. It was very Granger centered, and it was, because my concerts were all about me. And how could they not be? It was it was a business, and I was the widget that was for sale. And as I wrestled with kind of the icky feeling that even if I say the gospel on stage, even if I sing a praise song, even if I tell people a brief testimony, this is still all about you. And so I decided I should test this. The Bible says, do not be conformed to this world. Instead, be renewed by the transforming of your mind. And that by testing, we can discern the will of God. So I decided to test it in a way that I would go on stage and just kind of reflect on my emotions, because I needed to know these things. And I would test it, and I would go on stage and I would play a few songs, and I would think, man, those people in the front row are not raising their hands. What's wrong with you people? Uh-oh. Or, man, there's like a bunch of empty seats in the back. What's wrong with this city? I know we sold it out last time. What's wrong with these people? And I'd be like, oh. And the more that happened through that testing, I realized, oh, this is sin. This is a need that I need to be worshiped. I need adoration My pride is taking over. And I knew I've got to surrender this. There's no way out of this for me personally. I think there are people, possibly, it would be very difficult, that could live a celebrity life and they're doing it for the glory of God first. I don't think I've personally met someone like that, but I don't want to say it's impossible, but it was for me. I couldn't do it. My pride would creep up. My need, my wants, my fleshly desires of wanting to be relevant and needed and wanted and adored, and that was always outweighing the use of the platform for the gospel. So I decided I've got to quit. And I needed to just surrender that to God. And if he redeems it one day, after a separation of music from myself, if he redeems it, great. But I had to come to the realization that if he doesn't, then that's okay too. And I told my wife that I was going to do that. And she convinced me rightly, I believe, to at least have a farewell tour, to have everyone give a chance to say goodbye. And after that, after the last tour, after the last show, I felt peace. I told the crowd on that last show, I wanted them to know something. I wanted them to know that I loved music, and I love touring, and I love performing, and I love songwriting, and that didn't change. Because if it did, if I didn't love it, or if I was burnt out, that would just diminish God's grace and how he reordered the desires of my heart. Instead, God was elevated in a way, and a love for his people was elevated in a way that just kind of diminished the other passions of my life. And I told people, I said, the best way to describe it is a parable that Jesus tells in Matthew 13, where he says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field that a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field.
Yeah.
And so it's not a lack of love for all the things that the man has. It's the treasure so brilliant and beautiful that it's worth, to have it is worth giving up everything.
Yeah. My gosh, this is the hardest podcast I've ever done, because everything you say, I want to just sit and think about it. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to ask the next question. But it's just, I love it. And I knew, I told Naomi, or I told some of the people, I was like, when Granger gets here, like, I want to be friends with him, because I feel like you just resonate with my spirit and the way that you think. And I'm so challenged by it. So I just appreciate your depth, and how you quote the word. And it's just evident, that you're in it and you've been with Jesus. And the other thing that I think is so cool that you shared with me today or last night, and I kind of put it in this context for people of like, you've done all this to follow Jesus and you've reordered your life and your desires, but at the end of the day, you're still Granger Smith. At the end of the day, there's still a podcast that tons of people listen to. There's still this huge following. The book is done really well. Like, there's all these things. And I was asking you about this season of your life, and the thing that you immediately kind of went to was the importance of the local church.
Yeah.
And I read it in your bio too, on your website, of right now I'm content to like serve under my pastor and to just serve my local church, and the importance of the local church, which coming from you, I was like, that's so profound. Because you could probably be booked to speak every other day, and be doing all these other things, but you've found value in being with the body of Christ. And can you just talk about how God brought you to that and what that means to you?
Yeah, that's critical, because if I don't do that, if I don't put myself under the authority of our church leadership and be held accountable by my brothers in my local church, then who's to say that I wouldn't just fall into the same trap of needing that praise and adornment as a traveling preacher?
Yeah.
I would have the same sin. It doesn't matter if I'm singing country music or telling the gospel. I could easily get that same creeping feeling of, this is all about me. Give me the green M&Ms, In fact, I came here to visit you, and you guys, like your church, just so graciously gave me like a little gift basket with like shirt and a hat and some food. And I'm so grateful. And I texted you that. And at the same time, I want to also keep myself in check and be like, hey, Josh, also just want to tell you I came to serve you guys. So I don't want to get used to being served because that's my sin. And I don't want to fall into that. So there's the local church for many reasons, helps me with that. I have brothers around me and sisters around me that support me and keep me in check and affirm me and surround me with grace. And you and I talked at breakfast about how, as a Christian, we talked about faith without works is dead. And one of the outworkings of a saving faith is you have a growing love for God's people. And God's people, the way that they gather and worship on a Sunday morning is something that we've done for 2,000 years. And so there is a craving that should, in a healthy believer, begin to cultivate a growing desire to worship and to gather and to hold each other accountable, to pray, to sit under preaching, to sit with our family. And that has been something I've missed as a country singer that's touring on Saturday nights.
Right.
And I'm flying on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And so it's just such a sweet season to be a believer that's so much of God's grace to his people flows through the local church, and we can't miss that. Yeah. In fact, I want to show you something. And we didn't plan this, but I do think about this a lot, and I want to show you. This is kind of a theology, a 2024 theology that's floating around. My brother Parker sent me this. It says, this is an Instagram screenshot, and it says, "The world says you better be in church on Sunday morning, but I pray more outside in the place that he built." Or, "You don't have to be in a man-made place to see the kingdom." So that's the 2024 theology of like, and a church is not that big a deal.
Yeah.
But the Bible says, don't forsake the gathering.
Yeah.
Why? Not because it's some like burdensome command, but because that's where God's grace flows so evidently through his people in the love for the people. One way that we really show who God is to the world is by the way our church loves each other.
Yeah.
And the outside world sees it and goes, that's different. Those people love each other in a way that I want and I don't have.
Yeah.
And that love, our spiritual gifts are used within the parameters of the local church.
Yeah.
The teaching, the praying, to be able to nurture and to sit with someone in their grief, to encourage a brother that's having a hard week. How's your week going? Man, it's been a tough week. Let me encourage you, brother. Let me take you to coffee. These things happen inside the church in a way that doesn't happen in the woods like this Instagram. Right.
Yep.
And so these are just things that I'm uncovering as in just the last few years.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, thank you for being obedient. Thank you for, you mentioned at Evangel, we talk about like, we want to glorify God in all we do. And we want to honor people. Like we glorify God and we honor people. God deserves all the glory. People get honor, for where they serve him. And so I love and appreciate your humility, but I also am willing to honor you because of your obedience, and everything that you've shared and your willingness to follow Jesus. And I often tell our church, like the road of discipleship and following Jesus is littered with things that you laid down, things that you sacrificed, things that were a part of your old life, and you let them go. And you've just demonstrated that in a beautiful and obvious way, and so we honor you for it. And not just you, but Amber and your whole family.
Amen.
For how you guys have lived that out. And so I can't wait for you to speak to our guys tonight.
Me too.
And if you're listening and you're like, man, I want to hear more about Granger and Amber and their journey, there's the Granger Smith podcast. There's Like a River, the book. Is there anything else you want to shout out?
On all social media, I'm just Granger Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of usually becomes the hub of whatever I'm doing, usually kind of filters through that.
Yeah. And Amber has an account and she's got some stuff going too. So if you want to follow Amber, is it just Amber Smith?
I believe it's at Amber Emily Smith.
Okay. So follow along on their journey. I just think there's more to come for you guys.
I hope so.
And for God's calling on your life. So thank you for coming to North Dakota. Thank you for building the church. And thanks for joining the podcast.
Of course, brother. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks everybody for joining us. If you think this would help somebody or encourage them, feel free to share it. But we'll see you next time on Highly Unlikely.